Okay, so we're diving into Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and, well, your afterword, which, wow, really adds another layer to it all. We're talking about a man who clung to, of all things, a platinum tie pin in Auschwitz.
It's striking, isn't it, that even in that horrific place, amidst such unimaginable suffering, that this desire for beauty, for hope, could still
It's like
exist.
this quiet act of rebellion against, well, against everything they were trying to do to strip away their humanity. And that's what I think makes Frankl's story so powerful. This wasn't some, detached observer writing about it from afar. This was prisoner, hashtag 119,104, living it.
Absolutely. He was right there in the thick of it, enduring the same degradations, the same struggles as those he later wrote about. And that context, I think, makes his insights all the more powerful, wouldn't you say?
100%.
Hmm.
Frankl wasn't just a psychiatrist with theories. He was living proof that even in the darkest depths, the human spirit could endure. But how? Where do you even begin to process that kind of trauma?
Well, put yourself in Frankl's shoes for a moment. Imagine being ripped from your life, stripped of your identity, reduced to a number.
It's dehumanizing in the most literal sense.
Exactly. And that's where this journey begins, with that brutal shock, that complete upheaval of your world. Frankl even talks about this chilling moment on the train to Auschwitz, when people first saw that sign, Auschwitz.
I can't even imagine.
Their hearts sank. Their worst fears were materializing right before their eyes.
It's like the mind's way of trying to protect itself, trying to shut down to avoid being completely overwhelmed by the sheer horror of it all.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's a universal response to trauma, wouldn't you say?
For sure.
That initial disbelief, the clinging to fragments of the life you once knew.
And that's where Frankl's phase one begins, right? This period of intense emotional shock. But I imagine the human psyche can't stay in that state of acute shock forever.
Precisely. Think about the sensory overload of it all, the stench of the camp, the sight of those skeletal figures, the constant threat of violence. It's overwhelming, and at some point, something has to give.
So the mind, the body, they go into a sort of lockdown mode to cope.
It's a survival mechanism.
But surviving at what cost?
Exactly. It's like hitting the emergency shutoff switch on certain emotional responses just to get through the day.
That's a chilling thought. And that emotional blunting, that descent into apathy. It's a recurring theme in Frankl's account, isn't it?
It is.
He describes this scene, this absolutely gruesome scene, where a doctor is casually removing a young boy's frostbitten toes.
That scene is incredibly tough to read, for sure. But it's a stark illustration of this emotional detachment that began to permeate their lives. And you have to remember, it's not that the doctor was intentionally cruel. He had become desensitized.
Desensitized to suffering itself.
Yeah.
It makes you think, even in our own lives, how we build up these emotional walls to cope with stress, with difficult situations.
It's a question worth pondering, for sure.
Because there's a fine line, isn't there, between protecting yourself and, losing a part of your humanity.
Absolutely. And that's what's so fascinating about this descent into apathy that Frankl describes. On one hand, it's a defense mechanism, a way to simply exist in that unimaginable environment. But on the other hand, it's also taking them further away from their humanity, from their capacity to feel.
Exactly. It's a double-edged sword. And this is where Frankl's phase two kicks in, where apathy becomes less of a temporary shock and more of a sustained state of being.
Almost like their souls are going into hibernation, just to survive the harsh winter of the camp, so to speak.
That's a powerful image. But like you said, this emotional detachment, this apathy, while a shield, it can also become a very slippery slope.
Because if you let yourself fully feel every loss, every injustice...
It would crush you.
Exactly.
Your spirit would be completely broken. But then again, if you lose that capacity to feel, haven't you lost a part of yourself already? So how do you hold on to your humanity in an environment designed to strip it away? Frankl talks about this idea of inner freedom, right?
He does.
The freedom to choose your attitude, even when you have absolutely no control over your physical circumstances.
And this is where things get really interesting, I think. Because Frankl argued that even in a concentration camp, where they were stripped bare of everything, they still had this one precious freedom left. They could choose their inner response to their suffering.
That tie pin. It's funny, it keeps coming back to that tie pin. This tiny act of bartering for something beautiful, something luxurious in that place.
I love that you brought that up. It's such a perfect illustration of Frankl's point.
It's defiant in a way.
It is. It's like they're reclaiming a little piece of themselves. They had so little control over their external world, but their inner world, their thoughts, their beliefs, that was still theirs. And that, Frankl argues, was the key.
The key to survival. And not just physical survival, but something more.
Exactly. It's about surviving spiritually, finding a reason to wake up each day when everything around you screams that there's no point. That's where we get to the heart of Frankl's work, logotherapy.
It's about finding meaning. And it reminds me of that anecdote about the American doctor who asked Frankl for a one-sentence summary of logotherapy, to which Frankl replied, "The patient may remain sitting erect, but he must hear things which sometimes are very disagreeable to hear."
You know, I've always loved that quote because it perfectly captures the essence of logotherapy, wouldn't you say? It's not about sugarcoating reality or offering easy answers or telling people what they want to hear. It's about facing the harsh realities of life head on and finding meaning in spite of them, not in the absence of them. You see, I once had this patient.
Hold that thought, and I think we should come back to this after the break. So before the break, you were about to share about a patient of yours and how this all ties into logotherapy.
Oh, right. Yes, I had this patient, and he was going through a rough time, just a really rough time. Job loss, divorce, you name it. It was like everything was falling apart, and he kept saying that all he wanted was to feel happy again, like he did before all this stuff hit the fan.
I can only imagine. It's that natural human instinct, isn't it? To want to avoid pain and just seek comfort. Who wouldn't want to just go back to feeling happy?
Exactly. But here's the thing that I was trying to help him see. Sometimes the path to, well, to real meaning, to genuine fulfillment, it might actually take us through those tough emotions, through the fire, so to speak.
It's like that saying, what doesn't break you?
Makes you stronger.
Right.
It's about resilience. It's about finding those glimmers of light, even in the darkness. And those glimmers, they can really be found anywhere. You know, it might be acts of love, connecting with people, even just like stopping to appreciate the beauty around us, even in those small moments.
Just like that platinum tie pin in the midst of Auschwitz.
Exactly. You got it.
And it makes me think about Kushner's afterword and his reflection on, well, on the duality of human nature. To quote him directly, he says, "Man is that being who invented the gas chambers of Auschwitz. However, he is also that being who entered those gas chambers upright."
Wow. It's a powerful statement, isn't it?
It really is.
This capacity for both immense good, but also such horrific evil. And it's a question we all have to wrestle with, I think, on some level. What will we choose to act on?
Right. What will we choose? Because knowing what we do about human nature, about the depths of cruelty that we're capable of, how then do we choose to live our lives? How do we find that sense of meaning, that purpose?
And maybe even more than that, how do we each contribute in our own way to making the world a slightly brighter place, even if it's just in our own little corner of it?
It's a question worth pondering. And maybe that's the true legacy of man's search for meaning, wouldn't you say? It's not just a story about surviving Auschwitz, it's a story about surviving, period. About finding meaning, especially when life throws its worst at you.
It's a call to action.
It is. A call to action to choose hope, to choose love, to choose meaning, even or maybe especially when we're surrounded by darkness.
Because that spark, that human spark, that will to find meaning, that's what endures.